All right. And like we said, I'm Adam Rosenkoetter. If anyone has questions during this, please feel free to jump in. I'd rather you guys just ask questions and raise your hand and I'll try to get to you. So I want it to be interactive and not just me talking. So as I go through it, if you have questions, you want me to show you something, you want me to talk about something different, just let me know. How's the volume back there? Pretty good? Okay. So about me. So I started Soul Design about 11 years ago, right at the .com bust, so that was an interesting time to start a company. But we got through it, developed some good clients. I've been a technology director for the entire time, and my background is on the web development, web application development side. I've been working in that field for about 14 years. Before starting Soul, I jumped around to several different companies, worked on website development, e-commerce website development, web application development, that kind of thing. Started working with Drupal and dabbling with it about 3.5 years ago. And then we really switched wholesale to it for any of our larger sites about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago? Yeah. We'd done some stuff previous to that, but really found it as a platform that we could adopt and use, particularly for the more complicated and larger sites that we work with. Prior to that, we worked with a lot of open source technologies, and WordPress was one of our kind of go-to platforms for more brochureware sites, for blogs, for simpler sites. And then we still work with WordPress, but as soon as it gets above a certain size or a certain level of data complexity, we go over to Drupal. And that's kind of the methodology we've taken. In terms of mobile development, I started working with Phonegap. It was actually probably more like 3 years ago when Phonegap was really in its infancy. So it didn't even have a full version yet. You were really experimenting to see what you could do with it. But the issue that I'm actually going to outline, that the reason we went to it for Solta, is that they had an insane time frame. They wanted an iPad app developed. We didn't have time to do anything different, and there wasn't time to do it in Objective-C or anything else. So we needed a quick way to do it with web skills. And that was the original reason for using Phonegap. And since then, we found it as a really good platform for cross-platform mobile application development. But that was kind of the original idea. So we wanted that solution that we could get something out there quickly. After we went through the first version, we were able to get the app out there pretty quickly for Solta so they could have it for their conference. We realized that there was a lot of great things that we could do with it. And then we started working with other ways that we could manage the content inside of Phonegap, outside of a more manual approach or pushing app updates, and that's kind of what I'm going to talk about as it relates to Drupal. But one of the great things about Phonegap, for those of you who are not real familiar with it, is that you can develop once. You can use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, things like that. A lot of skills that web developers are used to using, and you can deploy it across multiple platforms. And so with Phonegap, you can go, iOS and Android are the most prevalent, but you can roll it out for Windows, you can roll it out for BlackBerry, and I imagine a lot of these will be updated very soon with the new versions of BlackBerry, new versions of Windows Mobiles, things like that. But right now, fundamentally, we're usually going to roll it out for iOS and Android, but you always have the opportunity to go to other platforms as well. Yeah?
Did you also evaluate Titanium when you made this decision?
Yeah, so at the time, way back. Yeah, so the question was, did I evaluate Titanium when we're looking at Phonegap? Answer was, at that time, Titanium was even more in its infancy than Phonegap, and and then beyond that, it was a little more complicated platform to kind of work with. Since then, I've re-looked at it, and I think it has some advantages. But now that Phonegap has really gotten a lot more support, it's got Adobe, it's got things behind it, we've actually seen more and faster development on the Phonegap side. So as we looked at it, we kind of revisited it, and we're like, well, no, we still actually think this is a pretty good approach.
Thanks.
We also did look at RowHub and the Row technologies that you can develop in Ruby on Rails and then roll it out multi-platform as well. We did one project with that, and again, it came more down to developer skill set. So if you're a Ruby developer, RowHub's a great way to go. If you don't have a lot of Ruby developers, then you're probably not going to do RowHub. But we did look at it. It did work pretty well. Did the same kind of idea. A little bit different in the way that it deploys and compiles, and some parts of it I like, some parts I didn't like. So then why Drupal? Why did we pick Drupal as a possible back end to this? I think that most people would look at it and say, okay, we've got a custom iPad app Why not just build a custom CMS for that custom iPad app? And the short answer was, why would we do that? We already have an application with Drupal that can handle content very, very well, really any kind of content. We can create any kind of content type. We can use all the built-in security roles and the models, all the various modules that are available, as well as we can use content types and define whatever we want that content type to be that we're going to need for our mobile application. So it started to make more and more sense as we thought it through, what could we use? And we actually originally built an app with WordPress as the back end. And it works. It functions fine. The issue is just that all those contents are posts. They're not inherently, they're not really that applicable a lot of times to what you're going to try to push out to a mobile application. So Drupal was a better choice than WordPress, although you can do it in WordPress too. The other thing is we needed to be able to publish out in XML or JSON, depending on kind of what you're consuming. And the nice thing with views in Drupal is that that's built in. You can basically create, a view and have the output be XML, and you're done. And so the ability to very quickly get the content type built and deployed out as XML was a huge benefit. Our development time for the back end of this was so small. I mean, we essentially had the base backend up and running and publishing in a week. And we couldn't have done that custom. There's no way. The other thing is, the company that we deployed this for, Solta Medical, we were already in the process of rebuilding all of their sites on Drupal, so they already knew Drupal. So big advantage there, you don't have to relearn a new CMS. We have since re-platformed 6 of Solta's sites onto Drupal. I think there's 1 or 2 more remaining of companies that they've purchased. So those are the main reasons why I think Drupal makes pretty good sense for this. And the more that we've used it and deployed content and worked with it, our content editors, the more sense it made. So now I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about Solta Medical. And again, if you have questions, jump in. But the main idea here is I'm going to take you through kind of what we did for Solta Medical, and then I'll jump into the actual application as well as the Drupal backend to show you what's there. I'll actually show you also a sample Phonegap project so you can see how it can consume JSON, just so you get an idea of how easy that is. But to start with, Solta Medical, they're a large medical devices company in the San Francisco area. At this time that they came to us, again about 3 years ago, they were looking for something that they could deploy for their sales force. And their sales force is all over the world. They're in over 50 countries. They have like 150 salespeople. And what they were doing was printing brochures and shipping them all over the world. And so it was expensive, it was time consuming, and it was out of date often. And so they wanted to solve that problem. And they looked at the iPad as a possible solution. It's like, well, what can you do that we could deploy to our entire sales force and push content out to them in a much easier and more cost-effective way? And it turns out this was a really good way to do it. So the idea was that we could take all of their promotional materials, all of their advertising, all of their brochures, all of their technical documentation for all the products that they sell, and push them out to the iPad apps that the sales force could then walk around when they go into a doctor's office to sell these products, and they've got everything in their hand. And they don't have to have a whole briefcase full of brochures that they're toting around all these different places. And the other idea is that the management wanted to have the salespeople accountable for all that new material. They wanted to be able to push content out and know that they got it, and follow up with the salespeople to see that they got it. So they're using it in combination with a company called AirWatch that allows them to see usage of actual iPad, and also allows them to turn iPads off if they need to, because these are company-owned iPads. So those are some of the big things that they were trying to do. So our initial solution, like I said, we had basically about a month to build the initial prototype of this, which is not enough time. So we built it, HTML, CSS, and we compiled it with Phonegap. We were powering it off of XML, which worked to initially get the application out there. The problem was we were adding more and more and more content, and they were wanting to update it all the time. And so basically what was having to happen is that developers were having to edit XML every single time they wanted to make a content update. And so it got really, I've actually even done it myself. It is just horrendously painful to do. So they're basically taking an Excel document that they would update. They put everything up in a Dropbox. You go grab the new Excel document, you go grab all the new files. You then try to sort through and copy and paste from Excel to XML, correcting any issues as you go. And it was awful. So we did that for a while. I'm like, okay, this is not a workable thing long term. So what can we do to make it so that they can update their own app? And that solution was that they need to be able to manage the content, change the titles, change the articles, change brochures, PDFs, videos on an ongoing basis because they have things that are happening all the time. And they needed to be able to do it without involving a developer at all. And so that was the intent, and that's what we did. We also didn't want to force app updates because this is not an app that's in the App Store, right? So this is not going through iTunes. And so you can't really do app updates that easily without going through the App Store. So we need to be able to have a push mechanism, also push the content out. So once it's published from the CMS, it pushes right out, publishes the JSON, and the app goes and looks for it, gathers the new stuff, and downloads any new content. And that was the kind of the methodology that we used to develop the base of it. So from there, we converted to Drupal. Like I said, they were already in the process of moving over multiple sites to Drupal, so they knew Drupal at this point is a little bit. Now the content editors can update without any developer assistance. We built a preview of the app into Drupal, not as actually a Drupal page, I'll show you what it looks like, but we actually built an HTML little interface so that when they create new content, they can take a look at the preview, make sure it looks okay before they go and publish the app. Once they publish the app, it basically publishes the new JSON file, and any app that's out there in the field is going to look for that change and go download it. So you obviously need to check over your work before you do so. So we built a preview in there. We're leveraging the Views XML module. We are not using the Views JSON because we need such a custom output, because in this case the app was already built. So the way that it consumed JSON had already been constructed, and we didn't want to rebuild the app's portion of that. So we're using a custom script that goes and takes all that XML coming from the Views XML, wraps it all together, creates one giant output that the app can go look and compare, see if there's any changes, and then grab the JSON, downloads it. If there's any files that are in that JSON that it doesn't have, it goes and downloads all those files. And some of those files are pretty large. The other core requirement here is that they needed for the app to work offline, because they thought, well, our salespeople are going to be out driving around, they're going to be talking to people in the middle of nowhere, we can't have it be dependent upon having an internet connection. So what happens is it downloads a payload of all the files, and the JSON runs locally. When it has a connection again, it'll go check again and see if there's been an update. But it can run completely offline, after the first download of all the content. So that's the way that we basically created it. Any questions about the kind of the base structure here? Yeah.
Did you guys consider using feeds?
Yeah, we looked at it, and it turns out we didn't even really need it. I mean, what we really needed was simplicity, which was that we needed to be able to take this XML output and just turn that into JSON, and that was about it. We didn't need anything to go much beyond it. We looked at it, and we were at the point we were actually figuring out how do we actually do this. And that Views XML just seemed to be the easiest method to kind of publish the data out.
What was that question originally?
The original question, did you look at using feeds, the feeds module? And yeah, we did. But
Just keeping you honest.
yeah, thank you. Remind me again if I don't repeat it. Okay, so what happened with it? Well, so the new app is on version 5 now, and the versions have gone very quickly, so there's not necessarily big changes from app to app. But there have been multiple versions of the app that have been rolled out with various enhancements and changes. They've since bought 2 more companies, so we've had to push out 2 new brands into the app. So they're changing things rapidly. They actually just purchased another one, so we're going to change it again. We are also in the process of rolling out the Doctor app. So this will be basically the same app, but rolled out to their customers. And so I'll show you what this looks like as well. It's very, very similar, but this will actually go to the customer, and the doctors will get it instead of just the salespeople, and it will be for a single product. So a single product line that a doctor needs to sell. The idea is that we're going to roll 5 more of those brand apps out by the end of the year. And so now that we have the basis of the app there, we have the mechanism for powering it, we're going to keep going with it. So the Fromage app is going to launch by the end of this month. and then we'll keep going from there. And there'll be 4 more coming right after that. And then, like I said, they keep buying companies, so there'll probably more apps coming thereafter. Their printing and production costs have been basically eliminated as it relates to salespeople's materials they carry out in the field. They've basically said, no, we're doing it this way, and this is the tool that you're using to sell, and that's what they've done. Yes, sir?
How do you've eliminated the printing, but you have to get that material to the doctor anyway. How do you do that?
How do you what?
How do you get the material to a doctor? You're going to be walking away with the iPad, I assume.
Yes, good point. So the question was, how do you get that content to the doctor if you're not printing it out and taking it to them? We built a feature for that. So as part of the app, you can actually create a shopping cart of documents that you want to email to somebody from the app. So you can be like, hey, Mr. Doctor, here's this app. You asked this question, let me add this to your cart. At the end of our consultation or when I get back in the car, I'll email you all those documents so you got everything you need, but not what you don't need. So it eliminates that waste of all that stuff that they might just throw away, and the printing behind it too. The other advantage is that we can do this for any language, and so the app actually functions and the documents are categorized into different languages, so you can do it for, I think, 8 different languages. The other big part that the management was really big on was accountability. So in the past, what they'd have happen is the salesperson would say, well, I never got that document. I never received information about that new product change. How could I sell it? I haven't gotten it. Well, now they know they got it. And they actually kind of check in and see that the salespeople download the new content on a regular basis. So it gives them another tool to go back and talk to them about and to make sure that they've got the most appropriate information at the right time. So that's kind of the result of what we built here. So what's needed, and there's lots of ways to do this. I'm not saying the way we did it is the only way, but here's some of the things that we've seen we needed to be able to accomplish this. So obviously you need to define your content types. In our case, we defined, I think, about 6 different content types for the app that are specific for Solta. But you may get away with running 2 or 3, just depending on what your app's going to be. We use views XML extensively, and so basically all of those content types you can create as a view and then outputs it as XML. If you're going to output directly from there, you also need views JSON, which I'll show you an example of. I'm actually using in my sample app. We're actually using then a custom PHP script that goes and compiles all that XML into one JSON feed, and it does it in a very particular way. So we did create a custom script to do that, and you may find that's necessary. Yes, sir. So the question was, is there any reason why we're consuming JSON as opposed to XML? Basically, it was just a lot easier to parse and handle. I mean, that's essentially it. We started out by doing XML, and there were some performance issues that we had with just handling big XML files. And then we were able to break up a piece and filter the JSON a little easier. On the Phonegap side, obviously you need to install Phonegap. You are going to compile either on your computer, or now they've got Phonegap Build, which is their cloud-based product. It's out of beta, so you can actually subscribe now to Phonegap Build and you can compile in the cloud. The advantage would be you don't need to have all of the SDKs installed on your computer. You can compile it for multiple platforms at once, which is pretty nice. And if anyone's installed some of these SDKs, they're big, and some of the configuration is a bit of a pain, so it does solve some problems there. The only issue I've had with it is they don't yet support plugins in Phonegap Build. So if you've got a more complicated app that needs some native functions and things like that, you may not be able to do it with Phonegap Build, and you may have to compile it locally on the computer. Obviously, if you're compiling for iOS, you need a Mac, you need Xcode, or at least some variant there that you can compile Xcode on. You need Cordova. Now it's called Cordova instead of Phonegap, but you install that on there. The Target Platform Development Kit. You need to be able to parse the JSON, and I gave a link here. Once this is published out, this is just a sample, and I'll show you just kind of what I did with it. But basically, you need to be able to take that data, grab it, and then render something or save it as a local file and be able to have offline access to it as well. So from there, you've got to make your decisions on how you want to handle the data. But grabbing the data and pulling it into an app for compilation by Phonegap is actually really simple. And they make it quite simple. So those are kind of the base things that you need. So the nice thing about it, from the Drupal side, it's really standard. There's nothing real crazy that you need to do. On the Phonegap side, your app could be as crazy as you want it to be, but the base ideas and the base technologies involved are actually pretty simple as well. So with that, let me show you a couple of the project elements here. Just so we're kind of all looking at the same thing, I'm going to load up Solta's actual app here. So this is the Solta What's New app, and you can see here they've got multiple brands. And they've got Thermage, Fraxel, Liposonics, Isolase, Clear and Brilliant, Claro, Rayora. Thermage is the oldest brand, and essentially what they have here are categories of content. So before and after clinical education, news and advertising, and so on. These are just categories of the content type that we set up in Drupal. And I'll show you the Drupal backend as well in just a minute. So basically, they can go through, these are the news and advertising pieces for the consumer side, and they can go in and get to all this information. And again, the idea is that Solta is showing that they're putting this money into PR and advertising, and they're supporting their customers who are the doctors. And so that's what they're trying to show here. And so you can select a language and pick a different language. So I can say I just want to show Spanish, and you're just going to show the advertising for Spanish. It's got a built-in PDF viewer. Let's find one of that is. Come on now. And we'll switch to Thermage. So the Thermage app is basically the same thing as the What's New app, except for that it's specifically for the brand Thermage. And so you can see that they can put all their videos in there. You can put all of your photos in there. So they can show the results, and you can show what happens before and after. They can show what they're doing in the news. And again, there's going to be 6 more of these. And so the idea is that every one of these is configured and controlled by one Drupal instance. So you'll essentially have 7 apps in there in the wild, out there in the wild, that they're just going in and altering the content in one Drupal instance and defining which app it belongs to. So they'll specify, I wanted to show up the Thermage app, or I wanted to throw up the What's New app, and it doesn't really matter. Because they were talking about, well, do we want a different site to manage each one? And the answer is, I think that would be pretty terrible for them to manage the content across all those different instances. So we created one site to manage all of these, and they just specify which one they want. Let me see if I need to kill this What's New app. And one of the things that you had asked the question on here was, if I want to, for example, send this to somebody, let's just go get some information. Clinical education. So with any of these elements, I can add it to cart or email it directly. So I can create a cart of things that I'd like to email to somebody. And then I can go and share my cart. So I can say, okay, I'm going to email those links out to Dr. So-and-so. And we actually use the native iPad mail client so that if you did, again, you were offline, it's going to save it as a draft, and then as soon as you have connectivity again, it's going to send it out. All of the actual files where it says click here to download, those are actually files sitting up on the web server. So again, you've got no issue in terms of getting those files out and through firewalls, and the size of some of these things are quite large. Most of them are PDFs. The movies we're not emailing because they're so large. There's also some licensing around that with the various television stations and things like that. So we're not. But actually, it could be a Word doc. It could be Excel doc. You could do any kind of normal file type and email it out. Just that they wanted to maintain kind of the integrity of most of their documents, so PDF kind of made sense. So what does this look like on the other side? Let's get rid of our screen sharing. All right, so really stock Drupal instance, as you can tell. We didn't really have a need to theme the administrative side of this because it's just for administrating the content. So it's a stock Drupal instance. The only things you'll see that are a little bit different is that we have this big deploy preview and deploy app buttons. And I'll talk to you in just a minute what those actually do. So if we were to go look at the content that's there, there's a ton of content out there. And if you go look at it, it's just a content type called items. And this is using, essentially field sets. And so you can use the title, you can pick the language, you can pick the title, the thumbnail, the actual document, the date. You can have multiple languages that you publish it in. Parent item, if it belongs to a parent, the date. If there are copyright restrictions, so that was an issue that we had with videos, is that the television companies did not want you to be able to email those out, so you had to specify it can or it can't be emailed. And then originally there was only going to be one doctor app, but since we've actually rolled it out, so there's going to be multiple, so we're actually probably, this is probably a deprecated item. So you pick your app type, and then of course you just save that item. The other things that are in there from a content perspective is basically any other piece of content that we want to define for our app. And so we defined alerts, which are the things that show up on the homepage, the brands that show up in that side menu, the categories, the highlights also show up on the homepage, items, which are all of those content items, the parent category, settings, which are just specific things for the app. Again, we don't want to have to roll out a whole new version of the app just to change one setting. And then the stats that also show up in the sidebar. We wanted a quick and easy way to update those. And so these are things like media impressions, share of voice, physician searches, and that kind of, those rolling pieces of content that come in the sidebar. So that was the idea of the content. And then, like I said, we created these views of all this information. So if you were to go look at brand categories, a real simple XML feed, it's just defining those categories. And it exports as XML. You could create your view with a JSON output, which I did for one of these, just to show you as an example. But essentially what we do is we then wrap all those XML documents up, make one JSON file, and then we have a URL where the app goes and checks that JSON file. And then if we go back home, a couple of things that we did a little different. So let me zoom out. So we actually created a little iPad wrapper for the preview. And so this is just an HTML file that is a replica of what's on the app. So it's HTML, it's using jQuery and JavaScript, and it's reading the same thing. It's reading a temporary version of that JSON that's been published and it's available on the web server, so that the person can go in and say, oh, they just published some new content for Thermage, let me go check it before I publish it and push it out to the entire sales force. So this is really, if you look at it, it's just an HTML file. And it's going in there and it's reading that same JSON feed that the app reads, and it gives us a way to preview all that content without having to go and deploy it out or connect directly to an iPad or do any of that stuff, which we originally did do and was a bit of a pain. And so we did that for one of the new versions of these. We actually are creating a preview that will show you the phone version as well as an iPad version as well as the Android version. So you can see it across multiple shots and go and test it in different ways. So one of the new apps that we're working on right now, we're actually doing it that way. So this is one use. Let me show you just an example of how you can reskin this thing though. So this is the exact same code base, and we rolled it out for a company called Wyka. Similar scenario, they've got a sales force in the field, need to be able to push content out, and they were tired of printing brochures. They wanted an easy way for someone to go out in the field and show this information to their customers. So same idea, same code base, and you can see it looks obviously very similar, same basic structure, but we rolled this out in under a month. From start to finish, from design to pushing it out. And this one will actually go out in the Apple B2B store, so you can do B2B for those customers that are really not selling to consumers, but are selling to other businesses. The Apple B2B store allows you to publish that out, and then give that link to any of your customers or whoever the other business is that you're selling to, and then they can install that with no charge. Obviously, there's no actual price behind it. And then one other app we're also working on, just to give you a little different example. This is also powered off Drupal. Completely different app, totally different code base. But just to show you there's some different things you can do with it. This one's really for the phone. But just to give you an idea, this is a content app. It's powered off Drupal. And the idea is, quick and easily, so for doctors to be able to go in there and see what are the new guidelines as it relates to meaningful use, which is that basically the rule that's saying that you have to convert to electronic health records, and all the doctors are responsible if they don't do that, and currently they can get money back from the government if they do that. So the Meaningful Use app just gives them all that information in a quick and easy way. We actually built this one with Sencha Touch and then compiled it with Phonegap. But same idea, and that one's not quite out there yet. But just to give you an idea that basically you can take the same methodology and apply it to any kind of UI.
So are you currently designing sites right now where the content side is specific for one specific reason, it's not necessarily the general web page?
Yeah, so the question is, are we designing a specific site like for the app versus one for consumer facing, one for the app? So far we've done it where there's a site for each. We talked with Solta though, because they've got all these websites, why not just use the same content? The reality was the content wasn't the same, or else we could have. We could have then had one site that publishes content for both the app as well as for the front-facing customer to see. And if you think about it, it wouldn't be hard to do that because you just have different content types that you define. Their tricky part was they have 6 brands, and each of those brands has a different website. And so just the management of the content would have been a bit of a pain. Just the way that it's structured. But yeah, you could absolutely create a website, put all the content out there that's going out on the web, and then define which things you want to go into your app. And so you'd have one source of content. If your content was exactly the same and the format worked, you could actually not even do that. You could just, the same content that goes on the web goes in your app. And I've actually thought about that a lot. I think it's a big selling point, because instead of having to have an entirely different mechanism to publish content for your app, you're using one that goes for your website as well as your app. And I think if you structure your app the right way, that wouldn't even be that hard to do. In other words, if that content mirrored your website very closely, I think it'd be a piece of cake to do it that way.
Adam, is your development team using Apple for the development environment, or are they using Windows?
Well, anyone that's doing like the iPad app, are we using Mac or Windows for development? And fundamentally Mac. For iOS, you don't have a lot of choice there unless you're going to do compiling in the cloud, which again, there are some downsides to and some limitations. In theory, you could do that. You also could spin up a virtual machine or something like that, but most of my team's on Macs anyway, so it just worked out that way. I think we only have one developer that's on the PC, so she can't compile the apps.
You gotta have a few dinosaurs for that.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm not that familiar with iOS development. I was under the impression that anything you wanted to publish as an app on a Mac had to go through the App Store. And you don't use that?
Yeah,
How do you distribute the app?
Yeah, so the question is, typically you're right. Do you have to go through the Apple, iTunes App Store in order to publish an app? For consumer-facing apps, pretty much you do need to do that. And you're going to pay Apple, if it's a for charge, 30% of that app. and that's absolutely true. However, there are some ways around that. One, if you're an enterprise, if you're a larger company, or even just a mid-sized company, you can get what's called an enterprise certificate that allows you to just distribute internally. That's initially what Solta had, because they were distributing to their own sales force, so it wasn't like outside of their company. You get one of those certs, which is like $150 a year, distribute all you want, many copies of the app as you want there out there. But what we've started to see is that, let's say in the case of Solta's customers, they're not part of the company, so enterprise cert will be breaking the licensing if they try to distribute with it, which we talked to them about, and we decided collectively that'd be a bad idea. We weren't sure how Apple would respond, so we just didn't go down there. But Apple opened up the door that you can have the B2B store. So it's just like the App Store for consumers, but it's the B2B App Store. And the nice thing is you can essentially be like, okay, I want to distribute 10,000 of these apps at free or for cost. And you do it to the B2B store. It's not marketed the same way, but the mechanism is exactly the same. And so then I can send an email to all 10,000 of my customers and say, okay, there's new apps out right now. You can go to the App Store and get it. They're going to what looks essentially like the App Store, but it's the business-to-business App Store. And it gives them a little more control over downloads and things like that as well. So that change that Apple made really helps out as it relates to, I deal with a lot of companies that sell to other companies. So that was a big help, because prior to that, we were having to always get an enterprise cert for the organization that wanted to distribute. And then the way that it's worded is really that it has to only be distributed in the company. I do know some companies that have gone a little outside of that, which I'm not going to mention. And but you don't want to be caught. You can do it. You can do it easily. In fact, whenever we're in development and we just want to test apps, we compile it with an enterprise cert, because Sol has one, and it's just so much easier. Then I can send someone a link and they can install it on their iPhone or iPad or whatever, and done. On the Android side, it's much simpler. You can go through Google Play, obviously, and you should for a consumer app, but installing on most phones and tablets is a much easier thing to be able to just load it straight in. Some of the manufacturers like AT&T and Verizon have made that a little more difficult. But generally, you can still get around it and just sideload the app right in, and it's okay. On any of the Google phones or Google tablets, it's a piece of cake. Any other questions? All right, yeah?
What are some of your techniques for managing the nuances between in code and Android and iOS? You've got some differences.
Yeah, so the question was, what are we doing to handle the differences between, say, Android and iOS? The big thing is that all the really hard work comes from Phonegap in terms of compiling in the native format. Essentially, it wraps it in the native, not the native language, but it wraps it in a format that can be read in. But by using kind of style sheet switching, mostly what you can do is mitigate those changes by testing beforehand. And really, it's CSS differences more so than it is code changes beyond that. You generally don't have to alter your HTML. You generally don't have to alter your JavaScript at all. And it's really going to be, there are some device-specific things in terms of if you're trying to access a native function, that's going to be different. And there's going to be plugins that are needed for Android versus for iOS. But in terms of like the look and feel, typically you can get away with mostly making CSS-based changes. Just like if you're a web developer and you're developing for a website and you're looking at in Chrome or in Firefox and IE, it's those kinds of nuances. It's when you get to function that you get kind of the real differences between the different platforms. So, for example, we're deploying a Google Analytics plugin for this app, and there's two different ones. There's one for Android and one for iOS. So we're entering a difference between those two. But the way that you use it and interact with it is the same. In other words, the way you call the function is identical. So there are ways that you have to kind of work around it. The other thing is to, I would say, try not to do things that are too device-specific or platform-specific. So in other words, if I'm developing something that it looks like Apple, it looks like the way Apple things look, some of those things that you're designing are going to be too Apple-specific. So you almost have to have it in mind before you design. I'm going to go cross-platform. I need to keep it a little more standard. and not try to do things that are very, iOS or Android specific. I've also found that it's typically just a little easier to get some of your stuff to work on iOS than it is to Android. It just looks a little smoother. Some of the transitions operate a little bit better. So you kind of have to do some tweaks in performance when you start testing out on multiple platforms. And that is tricky. I mean, it's tricky when you start to know all the different Android devices out there. Yes, sir.
Also, the navigation is different. Like on Android, you have a back button, for example. iPhone, you don't. So you have to account for those differences and why differences. The same buttons on the phone itself.
Yeah, so you're saying that the buttons, the navigation is different, and that's the big one. The back button in Android versus iOS is substantially different. The other thing is that those on-screen navigation elements that Android have, they eat up some of your real estate, so you don't have to adjust things specific for Android because they take up another 80 pixels at the bottom that you have to account for and make adjustments. So there are definitely things that you have to do. If there are any other specific questions, I was going to show you one thing real quick here. So this is just a Hello World sample project in Xcode, and I did this just as an example. So what this is going to consume is it's actually going to go look for, let's see, actually let me go check and see which one's looking first. It's looking at alerts, okay. So I created a view called alerts, and that is that little chunk of titles on the home page of the app. And if you go actually look at the alert, all it's doing is spitting out the titles of all those elements or those different news items that are going to show up on the home page. So we go back over here. This is a pretty much vanilla Phonegap install. This is a pretty vanilla project. You can see that HTML is really simple. It's got a container, and it's got an ID called output.
Could you increase the font size?
Yeah. Well, maybe I can. I thought it was zoomed out. So, no, I can't. No, nothing's got anything. No. Alright, sorry. So basically, this little set of unordered lists is waiting for some sort of content. And then there's a little JS file out there that's going and pointing at our view. So there's your JSON out there pointing at the web server. And so all it's going to do is go in there and iterate and go through each of those items and essentially just output them. So if we go over there, and I hope my internet connection holds up here, we'll try to run it. This one is loading it off of the web server, so it is dependent on internet connection. And I did it on the phone just because it's a little bit easier. So you can see there is, I just compiled my iPhone app, and I went and grabbed the data off of my web server in JSON format and then displayed it essentially inside of there. So you can see that the result is that basically I create my HTML shell, I style it however I want to, I create a function, and you can see some of these are really simple little jQuery functions, and now I just figure out how to display it and use that data. So it gives you a lot of options to design because you're not going to be limited to where your data goes. You know that you design the way you want to. As long as the data is there, you can go grab it and display it. The other piece that you have to figure out is obviously, do you need to have connectivity to use the app? That's an issue possibly. So you may have to actually grab the file, load it locally, and allow for that persistent file locally. We looked at options in terms of running a local SQLite database, and we were doing that for some of our apps. But a lot of times you can actually load the JSON locally, store it on the app, it persists, and then when it has connectivity back, it goes and checks to see if there is a new JSON file out there. If there is, it grabs it, downloads it, stores that locally. If there's changes in the files, it goes and grabs the files, downloads them, and kind of waits for those to load up. But the base idea here is really simple. That essentially you use Drupal as that backend, and I set this up at about 25 minutes today. And you can see to get from absolutely nothing to at least a workable version of content that I'm loading out of Drupal is a really quick thing to do. So that was kind of the idea of what I'm going to show you. Obviously, the what's new app, the code base is much larger. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot of things that we're doing that are, account for like offline capability, account for performance, the design, and different things like that. So there's a lot of things still to design into it. But the core idea is that you can do this pretty quickly and easily. And I'd be happy to publish out any of the sample stuff. I've already given a link to where essentially this came from. So it's a little chunk of code. So really all I need is that jQuery file, and that. And then from there, it's a matter of doing the same formatting that you would do for a website. So it's HTML and CSS. And then obviously build in your interactions and your usability and all those kind of things.
And what's the performance like with Phonegap?
So the question was, what's the performance like with Phonegap? It greatly depends on your application and the framework and the way you build it. So we've done some things where we were not happy with the performance at all. So we used, as an example, not to badmouth jQuery Mobile, we used jQuery Mobile in one, and it just, at least the way we were using it, the performance on the swipes and the animations just did not hold up. It didn't look like a native app at all. So we've written some of our own custom stuff that performs pretty well. It really depends on that framework that you're using, more so than it does actually Phonegap. Now it is essentially a web UI wrapper, so you're not going to get some of the same kind of interactions you're going to see from a native app that's written really well. But some of the big apps out there are actually using this kind of thing. Some of them are using Titanium, some are using Phonegap, but you can get the performance, but you do have to do some tweaks sometimes to get there. But I would say that JavaScript framework, whatever you're using for that, that's probably more important than anything else. And we've experimented with several. I mean, jQuery works well. jQuery Mobile, Cincha Touch, I think works pretty well. The only thing I don't like about some of those frameworks is sometimes you can't get all the way down to the level of what you want to control because they're sort of controlling all those elements behind the scenes. Makes it easier and faster to build, but you may not be able to get quite as granular of control over your code. But Cincha Touch is a good one to get something developed very quickly. It's MVC, so it's got a nice structure to it. If you're comfortable with things like that, using some sort of structure like that, either from doing web programming or anything else that you've done, it's a good route to go. Using jQuery itself and creating some custom functions also works pretty well. Other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you all. Thanks for having me. It was fun.